Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. Today's a very special episode because I'm joined by Renee Swanson, a leading expert on covert narcissism, certified life coach, and the host of the Covert Narcissism podcast. With over a decade of experience, Renee helps survivors break free from emotional abuse and reclaim their lives. Together, we dive into the subtle yet insidious ways covert narcissism affects children, that's grown children as well, how emotional manipulation can be disguised as love, and that leads to confusion, self-doubt, and patterns that carry way into adulthood. We also explore why, when it comes to parenting, connection matters more than correction. This point really resonated with me as it aligns closely with so much of what I've seen in my own work with these individuals. This is how I work with them, always emphasizing connection. Genuine emotional attunement and containment, as you've heard me discuss in prior episodes, are key to breaking generational cycles of narcissistic influence. I hope you find this conversation as insightful and informative as I did. So without further ado, here's my interview with Renee. Hello, Renee. Welcome to the Narcissism Decoder podcast. I want to start off by first thanking you very much for taking the time to be with us today to discuss this really complicated, complex topic of covert narcissism. And we know that you're sort of a leader in the field on this topic. So I wanted to thank you for being here and really helping us sort through all of what this concept means. So thank you again.
You're very welcome. And Dr. Mazzella, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here. I love that we have so many people and experts in the field trying to expand this knowledge and get it into the hands of the people who really need it.
Yeah, I mean, and it seems like such an appropriate time because as more people are learning about narcissistic characteristics, what I'm beginning to hear in my own practice and the questions that I get from my listeners was exactly a topic that you covered recently, and that's why I was very excited to have you here. So it's not just about covert narcissism, but more specifically, what's happening is adults are recognizing or beginning to question whether their parents are actually covert narcissists. So maybe that's a good place for us to start, is you could give us some sense perhaps of what that might look like. In other words, like how does covert narcissism present itself in the parent-child relationship?
Absolutely. And it is a hot topic. It is an important topic, to discuss with our followers and people who are trying to make sense out of all of this. So covert narcissism in and of itself is more about the covert behaviors that show up of the different types of narcissism and the different styles of narcissism. And so it's the subtle, passive-aggressive, insidious things that when you see them as one-off, when you see it as just a simple moment, you don't think of it as being a problem. You don't think of it as abusive. You don't see it as a problem. And then as a child especially, you idolize your parents. Like you expect that your parents love you and care for you. You don't even consider that they don't. Mm-hmm. So when these subtle behaviors are showing up as a child, you just move on. They don't even really stick in your memory, but your behaviors start being affected by it. Your feelings start being affected by it. And so how it shows up is things like emotional manipulation, but it's disguised as love. It's disguised as being, but I just care about you. I'm only telling you this because I love you so much. You should be grateful. And what just happened was, maybe they're berating you for your performance in, say, a soccer game. You scored 3 goals, you had a great game, but rather than celebrating it with you, they're now ripping you apart for you could have done that part better and you could have done this better. I'm only telling you this because I care about you so much and I love you so much. So the child walks away feeling bad about themselves. I'm not good enough, but they don't understand why. They don't understand that it's because of the way that parent just interacted with them and framed their control of them as love. And so this is where it gets really confusing for a child. The covert behavior gets hidden behind what appears to be good behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, now I could see the covert piece of it, right? It's not like the typical, like a lot of people think of like the really loud, bragging type of narcissist, but this one is far more subtle and disguised, right?
It really is. Another way that it shows up is how they play the victim role.
Mm,
And so, for example, a parent might, if a child's acting out or trying to express their feelings to the parent, going, but I feel like I'm not heard, or I'm anything they're trying to express. So a child is trying to get some independence in their own voice. Okay.
mhm.
But the parent's response is, I guess I'm just the worst parent ever. Maybe I
Oh,
should just stop trying since nothing's ever good enough for you. That victim role now manipulates the child into, okay, no, I should be grateful. My mom or my dad, whoever it is, they love me. Clearly, they care about me. And now they're comforting the parent.
mhm.
That's another example of how do I put my finger on that and call that abuse? But boy, it sure doesn't feel good to the
Yeah.
child.
Yeah, I guess that begins to explain. That was another question that I was wondering about is why is it so difficult? Like now we mentioned, yes, we're getting out this information. People are becoming more educated, but it still seems, and I don't know, Renee, you tell me what you see, but it's still very difficult for the adult child then to recognize this, right? In their parents, like even as they survived, I think it's fair to call this like narcissistic abuse, right?
Right. Yeah, they survived it and they moved on, and now they're in a relationship, maybe starting to question the dynamics of that relationship. A lot of times is where the light bulbs start coming on. Their learned behavior of how to tap dance around this parent's emotions starts playing out in their marriage, for
Oh,
example. And so the reflection starts of, okay, why am I feeling like I've got to always care for their mood? I've always got to give. I've got to people please. Where did this people pleasing come from? And so they start to explore that. Now, I want to say here that recognizing that a parent has been abusive is incredibly difficult for someone to look at, to explore, to consider. And I want to make sure our listeners understand that even if you look back and you go, man, I think my parents were abusive here, it doesn't mean you have to hate them. It doesn't mean you have to go no contact. It doesn't change anything, but it can help you to understand where your learned behaviors have come from. And
mhm.
so it's work that needs to be done. But when you look back at your parents, it's okay to still love them. It's okay to still care about them. It's then actually helps you to be able to set healthier boundaries with them, because the boundaries then can be, the boundaries are for you. And we'll talk about that maybe here in a little bit. But I just want people to understand I'm not encouraging everybody to go no contact with their parents.
Mhm.
That's not what this is about. This is about learning how the impact of maybe your parents' trauma, because maybe it came from their childhood, how that carried over into you so that we could stop this generational cycle that's going on through so many families.
Yeah, that's a relief to hear because so often the recommendation, in the social media content is usually just boundaries or get away from them, go no contact. And yes, we'll definitely get to that because I'm very interested to hear more about once you recognize this. So you've described the behaviors and then you begin to recognize them in your parent, right? It's
Mhm.
like, okay, is it still hurtful? Does it get to the point where it's not as hurtful? What do you do then if you decide not to go no contact, right? So you still have
Right.
a life with them. You still may go on vacation with them. And then, like you said, you're a grown adult. So you may have your own spouse and your own children. We're getting further ahead in development here. But I'm just imagining what the nature of that relationship would look like. Would it look any different? How would you
Mhm.
feel? I guess before we get into all that, you're touching on one other thing, which I just want to sort of flush out a little bit more before we press forward, which is so when you grow up with this type of parent, I guess what I'm wondering is you began to mention you may see this in your own relationship now as an adult. Could you maybe flesh that out a little bit more? Like what might you begin to see as an adult in your own relationship that theoretically, right, is separate from your relationship with your parents? But I think what I'm beginning to hear, Renee, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it may not be that different because you're carrying something forward in your contemporary relationship.
Absolutely. And that is a lot of what happens. I want to look at two manipulative tactics of a covert narcissistic parent that I think is part of the reason why it's so difficult to see it, but it is also part of what like forms our behavior that carries forward into future relationships. Okay.
Mhm.
Those two behaviors or tactics are the intermittent reinforcement and the push and pull relationship.
Mhm.
So intermittent reinforcement as a parent to child is where maybe you're praised one day, but you're criticized the very next
Mhm.
for the same behavior. You know, the same behavior can get, you're so obedient and I'm so glad you listened to me when maybe you were just quiet at a mealtime, while they were visiting with their friend. And so you just know, okay, good. As a child, I learned I need to keep my mouth shut in this situation. I really appreciate how quiet you were and obedient. But the very next day, the same thing occurs. And now they're reprimanding you. Well, you never say anything. You should speak up more. So the inconsistency there,
Mhm.
okay, lays a foundation of anxiety. It lays this foundation of, I never know, is my behavior good enough? Is it not good enough? And so we start questioning this, all right? That carries forward into my future relationship where I can't judge whether my behavior was good or bad. I've got to have feedback in order to do that. Well, as an adult, I should be able to identify right from wrong. I should be able to validate my own experiences, but that's a piece that gets missed when you're raised with a covert narcissistic parent.
Dwell on that just for 1 second. So as an adult, you said, let's repeat that. You should be able, you said at some point, to figure out what I feel like internally, I guess, is right and wrong. Is that what you mentioned, Renee?
Yes, moving into adulthood, that's part of our maturing process.
Okay. And something, I guess, has to happen to get to that place. Is that right? Like I guess I'm wondering, because so many of these adult children don't have that capacity. So they're still very dependent, I'm imagining. Now, still on the parent, perhaps, and now on the spouse as well. Is that right?
Right. So from their parent's perspective, or from the child to the parent, adult child, they're still seeking that parent's validation. You move into adulthood and you're still trying to grasp that parent's approval.
Yes.
And so you're still struggling to figure out, how do I get that approval? Well, now in your marriage, you kind of play it, the same thing tends to play out. Now I'm looking at my spouse, whether this be husband or wife, wherever we are with that, I'm looking at my spouse for validation that I'm doing okay. And so we struggle to make that transition into self-validation.
Yes.
Of the maturing process of knowing. And so this is why I think it's so crucial that we get this information out. It's so that people can find the help that they need to be able to make that maturing process happen.
Okay. So please keep going. So you said there were two things. One was intermittent reinforcement, right?
Yes.
And there was another one.
It's the push-pull relationship. So in a relationship with a covert narcissist, you get this push-pull happens, like a yo-yo back and forth. So they might be emotionally connected with you and engaged with you, and I think you're great and wonderful, very charming. They might even appear vulnerable, but then it's going to flip, and they're going to be distant and manipulative and controlling, and even to the point of being cruel. And you never know what you're going to get. People call it the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Okay. It's that kind of context where you never know what you're going to get. What kind of mood are they in? What kind of glasses? I call them glasses. We're either in our good glasses or our bad glasses. If we've got our good glasses on, everything about you is wonderful and amazing, and you're the best child in the world. I am so lucky to be your parent. If the parent has their bad glasses on, the covert narcissistic parent, then everything you've ever done has been a disaster. And everything that's wrong in our world is your fault.
Yes.
And they bounce back and forth between that really inconsistently.
Yeah, you're touching on one of the most important sort of characteristics of narcissism that cuts through all different types of narcissism, which is the fragmented sense of self. We typically call it splitting, but I think you're nicely describing, like, clinically what splitting looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to hear your definition of splitting, because I do. That is what I understand that to be.
Yeah, it's at the core of all personality disorders. And basically what it means is they never develop an integrated sense of self, because early in development, what happens is if things go accordingly, something develops. It's just a psychoanalytic word that's called object constancy, which means they finally begin to develop a capacity to hold both good and bad in mind. It's a real developmental achievement. It's not easy. Most people don't even accomplish it, especially people at the borderline or the narcissistically disturbed individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to accomplish it, what's really necessary is what we call good enough mothering. But that just basically means having a caregiver there consistently, not perfect. You don't have to be perfect, just good enough, but you have to be reliable. And what you just described with the intermittent reinforcement, that's not reliable. It's so unpredictable. Yeah.
Right. No, it's exactly that. And when that good enough mothering, I love that concept, because what I tell people a lot of times, the people that I work with, is perfect is not what we're after. We've never been after perfect. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But the consistency of a loving relationship, a safe relationship. Okay. Safety is something I talk about with parents all the time of, look, no matter what's going on in that child's world, you've got to be their safe place.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be the place where their good emotions and bad emotions both can be expressed.
Yes.
And that safety is just crucial.
Yeah, but what about when a child's being so aggressive or hostile or provocative? What about then? What are you supposed to do? Are you still supposed to be safe, like a safe place for them? What do you do with that?
Absolutely. You are still their safe place. Even when they are being hostile and angry, there's a reason. There's a reason. And kids need connection more than they need correction. They need correction. I'm not saying they don't, but they need connection first.
I love it. I love it, Renee. Connection, not correction. Mm-hmm. And just to flash forward a little bit for everybody who's listening, I'm putting in sort of a plug, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind.
After this, Renee and I are going to flip this whole discussion. We're going to go over to her site, and I'll put the link below in the show notes, but we're going to talk about what happens when there's an adult who recognizes that their child may have these narcissistic characteristics. And one of the things that I talk about in particular, so you're a little bit ahead of me, Renee, is how important it is not to correct, but to connect. So that's sort of the whole underlying theory of what's really going to lead to change. Let's go in that direction then, just for a moment, because I wonder, let's keep moving forward developmentally. Okay, so now we have the adult child. We said some of these characteristics are appearing in their contemporary life, right? We want to think about, we said we'd get back to this. What do they do now in that relationship with their parents? In other words, what are some of the challenges that they may face? Do they go back to their parents? Do they talk about this stuff? How do they negotiate? What's the best way, I should say, to negotiate this?
That's a fair question. And I am going to say, in regards to finding, the secret pattern or the secret answer to all of it, there isn't one. There isn't a secret answer that's going to magically fix your relationship, okay, with the parent. I will say this, though, that some of the biggest challenges that are faced now in this, now that you've identified, okay, my parent got some covert narcissistic tendencies. Does that make them a full-blown narcissist or not? No idea. That's a whole nother scale to be explored. But the tendencies are there, and clearly they've interfered with me having a genuine relationship with my parent. Okay, what do I do? So in regards to, do I go and talk to them about it? This is one of the things where I say, you've got to find the right path for you, whatever that's going to look like. And if you are feeling really compelled to go talk to that parent about this, I support that. Go talk to them. Okay. Got no problem with that. If you start into that conversation and the defenses go up, the victim mode goes up, the poor me goes up, you're not going to make much progress. Okay. That's going to get in the way of them hearing you. If that parent sees this as a threat, they go into fight or flight, whatever that looks like. Their fight, their flight, their freeze, fawn, whatever that is. They're no longer able to have a logical, rational conversation with you.
Yeah. So what becomes really important, I would imagine, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that if they take that route and they decide to talk to their parents, it seems like it's critically important, the precise words that they use when they talk to their parents, because so much of what I hear is they have this insight and they recognize their parents may have these characteristics, and then they want to go back and share that with them as if that's going to help the situation. Like the parents are going to say, You're right. Thank you so
Everybody
much
wants
for this
aha.
enlightenment.
Yeah. They want that aha moment with that
Mhm.
parent, and it may never come.
Mhm.
It may never come. And so what I encourage people to do is awareness is crucial. Build your own awareness. Look at it from your perspective of, okay, what happened here? Hold on to your sense of reality, build your sense of identity, because as a child of a covert narcissistic parent, your sense of self is at threat. Okay. And so if you've got the wherewithal, if you've got the self-reflection and the ability to really explore this, then you can really establish your sense of self and your own sense of identity. Now, in your relationship with your parent, you're probably going to have to set some boundaries, but there's a misnomer here, and I want to look into this. Boundaries are not, you may not call me that, or you may not text me 30 times a day. If I start giving those kind of boundaries to a covert narcissistic parent, that's not going to go over well. Okay? It's going to be, they're going to get defensive. They're going to get their feelings hurt. They're going to just obliterate the boundaries. As soon as I tell a narcissistic person, don't do this, their wheels are already spinning as to how they can get away with it. All right. So it's not the approach that I encourage. If my boundary is, I don't want to get 30 text messages from my mother, in a week,
Mhm.
then I've got to set the boundary for myself of, I am only going to check her text messages during this window of time each day.
Mm.
During this window of time, I will answer these text messages. I don't have to tell her that. It's just what I choose to do, because boundaries are for us. They're not for the other person.
Yeah. Well, wait, let me jump in for a second because I'm curious what you think about this. To go back to the care, right?
Yes.
Connection, not correction. Tell me what you think about this because you're so much closer to it than I am. When you say like set this boundary, what if they designate this time during the day that they're going to test, check text messages, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they actually tell the parent that and they let them know how much whatever, they're busy at work or how much they're looking forward to hearing from them. And it's the best part of their day, that they can't wait to get out of work so they could check those messages and see how your day went. I don't know. I'm just making this up, obviously, as I go along, but I'm imagining as part of connection so that the parent doesn't feel like suddenly, when we were texting throughout the day, I feel so abandoned right now. And then that feeds into like, you see, you don't appreciate me. You've never appreciated me. Something like that.
No, those are great thoughts. And I really like what you're saying there. That's a reframing it. I'm going to reframe it to where I can present this in a positive way to that parent. And that's a great skill and a great tool to have. It goes to the next level of development within you, healing within you. So right off the bat, some people, they will try the approach of, I'm going to tell them that I'm only going to talk to them during this window of time. And I'm saying that's not necessarily the best approach. It is okay to just do it. But then the next step in your healing being, can I reframe this in a way that I can present it as a positive to them? They may or may not be receptive, depending on if they've got their good glasses on or their bad glasses on.
And you consider that the next step because I guess they have to already have enough distance from all this? Is that why it's the next step? Or have a certain level of peace or not become dysregulated themselves? I mean, I'm just trying to understand because I think you're probably right. It probably is the next level because it does imply that then you have to give something to that parent who you may still be feeling, some sort of resentment or hurt or disappointment with them.
That's exactly it. Because what I was going to say is when you first come to the realization that your parent is a covert narcissistic parent, there's a whole lot of feelings inside of you that have not been free to be expressed. Okay. You've been bottling them up for however many years now. And so when you first come to that realization and you give yourself some permission to let these feelings out, you could end up with a whole lot of anger, a lot of hurt, a lot of grief. There's a lot of feelings that come pouring out. This is not the time to go to that parent. I don't think this is not the time to go to that parent and say, I'm only going to answer your calls during this window of time, because it's going to come out uglier than maybe you want it to.
Yeah. And it doesn't have all those surrounding comments that I mentioned also, right? Because it may be too difficult for you to express something like that because you're still too vulnerable because you know what could happen. Well, you don't know that's the whole point with intermittent, right?
Right.
You really don't know what's going to happen.
So this is why I say this is a deeper level of healing. when you've gotten past some or worked through, not just ignored and moved past, but worked through some of the hard feelings.
Yes.
And I don't recommend that people work through them with the covert narcissistic parent. This is about your healing and work through them yourself. Then as you've gotten past that, you can start working on some connection with that parent. Then I love the reframing that you did there of, hey, I'm busy at work and I know, but during this window of time, this will be my time where I can enjoy my conversation with you. I can give you my full attention, even kind of showing that during this window of time, I'll put my other distractions down because I value this relationship.
Yeah. And just for the listeners, just to be very clear, when you say, so I could give you my full attention, you do not add, is that right? Or do you put this piece on? Because I know that's what you need, Mom. No, I'm just kidding.
Don't put that on. That would be easy to do. Or it would be like, you can say it in your own mind.
Yeah.
You can even, like, after you hang up, go, well, now you can voice any of that after, because you might need to still for your own healing, but not to that parent.
Yes. So I think you're getting into this now, but just in case there's something more that you wanted to add, I was also curious about what are some of the healing strategies? See, that's kind of the next level. We're sort of progressing along. We have the recognition now. Now we're thinking about ways they could get some space from their parents, right? Like, this is all part of healing, right? I would imagine. Are there any other strategies that you were thinking of, Renee, that could be helpful to somebody going through this process?
Absolutely. So I highly recommend getting some support of some sort, whether that be even just, your current relationship, your current marriage. If that partner is open ears, listening ears, and is willing to let you be vulnerable and vent some of this confusion, because there's a lot of confusion you're trying to work through when you're looking back at a childhood under a covert narcissistic parent. The confusion you need listening ears. So that can be, your partner, it could be a friend, it could be a trusted family member. It doesn't need to be a big group, but you need somebody. Okay. Don't try to do this alone.
Yes.
Then beyond that would be to connect with a therapist, a coach, somebody who has experience with this situation, because they're going to help you work through the feelings of, I'm crazy here. I feel like, I don't even know if I can trust my own memories, because we manipulate the memories so that we can make sure that that parent is on the pedestal that they've been trying to be on all of our lives. So there's so much of that we're trying to work through, that we can feel like maybe we're just, clearly I'm remembering it wrong, or I'm crazy. I should have been more. It's the guilt I'm trying to work through, the obligation that I'm trying to work through. And so in that regard, I highly encourage connecting with also a therapist or a coach that has experience in that.
Yeah, that makes sense, because as pathological as the relationship was, or maybe still is, you have only one parent, Well, you have two parents, but you have only one mother or father.
Right.
And it's a lot more difficult to give that up than one could imagine, right? So
It's
even as you're
incredible.
healing, and I don't mean giving it up literally, right? You are giving up the relationship, right? Just by getting some space, thinking about it, talking to them in a different way, you're giving up the relationship that once was, right?
And you have to grieve that.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. That's a mourning process.
It is. It is. It's a death of who you thought that parent was.
Mm-hmm.
You have to grieve that. And I do encourage people to grieve that, because you held an image of who you thought that person was, that mom or that father, that mother or that father. And grieving the image and actually giving yourself the space to mourn that piece of it can then allow that to get out of the way, so that now you have place for a new relationship with this person.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And we're saying this as if it's just that simple, right? But for anybody who's been through this kind of loss of a narcissistic relationship, they know how painfully difficult it is to mourn the loss, because so much of it is based in the intermittent, like you said, reinforcement, the fantasy that gets built up around the relationship, and one sense of self in relation to, not just the parent, but even now we said it could even be a contemporary figure or figures in your life. Mm-hmm. So this is incredibly complicated, this next step. So look, Renee, we have to begin to wrap it up, but I'll give you the last word. I would say we did a good job surrounding this, but in my mind, I have still so many questions that we can get into. But any last minute thoughts before we wrap it up?
Yes, I do. When somebody goes through a divorce of a spouse, that, carries its own complications. But when you get to the point you are, in essence, divorcing your parent, there's so much guilt that can come with that. And I want to address that for a minute, because when we are looking at this as, oh, I'm doing this to my mother, or I'm doing this to my father, and I can't believe that I'm treating them this way. Okay, whether that be to simply pulling away or ignoring one phone call can overwhelm you with guilt. Okay, but I want to encourage people to give themselves grace, because this is not anything you are doing to that parent. This is something you are doing for yourself. Okay, you are prioritizing your emotional health, your mental health, and in fact, in putting yourself in a better place emotionally and mentally, then potentially your relationship with that parent will actually get to a healthier place because of the energy now that you can bring into that from a different perspective. So I just want to encourage people that, look, I hear you. I know the guilt that lays in there and how strong and powerful that guilt is, but I encourage everybody to approach this by giving themselves grace.
Beautifully said. Well, thank you so much, Renee. Again, I'm expressing great appreciation for taking the time to be with me and my audience today. I'm looking forward to doing, and again, please everybody stay tuned. I'll put Renee's information in the show notes below, but we're going to talk about, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, the next part of this will be about when the parent discovers that they're living with an adult, what we call vulnerable narcissistic child. So stay tuned for that on Renee's channel. And until next time, thanks again, Renee.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. And I really look forward to our next conversation. I think that's going to be a really good one.
Great. Thanks. Okay, everybody. Bye for now. Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.